The afternoon sun cast a warm golden glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood as Sergeant Daniel Carter stepped out of the cab. He took a deep breath, letting the familiar scent of home wash over him. It had been 2 long years since he last stood in front of this house, the house he had grown up in, the house that had changed in ways he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Wearing his crisp army uniform, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, Daniel walked toward the front door. His heart pounded with excitement. He had imagined this moment countless times during his deployment. He thought of his mother, Julia, and most of all, his little sister, Emily. She had been just 10 years old when he left. Now, she was 12, almost a teenager. He wondered how much she had grown. Before he could knock, the door swung open. "Danny!" Emily's voice rang with joy. She threw her arms around him, hugging him as tightly as her small frame allowed. Daniel laughed, lifting her off the ground with ease. "Hey, kiddo, you've gotten taller," he said, ruffling her dark brown hair. Emily grinned, her blue eyes shining. "And you got stronger," she said, feeling his broad shoulders. Just behind her, Julia stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears. "My boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She pulled Daniel into a tight embrace, holding him close. "I missed you, Mom," Daniel murmured, burying his face in her shoulder for a moment. "I missed you too, sweetheart," Julia said, stepping back to look at him properly. "You look so grown up." Before Daniel could reply, a deep voice interrupted. "Welcome home, son." Daniel turned to see his stepfather, Richard, standing in the doorway. Richard was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s. He had short graying hair and a firm, unreadable expression. His words were polite, but something about his presence made Daniel uneasy. Maybe it was because he barely knew the man. He had only met Richard once, briefly, before leaving for his deployment. His mother had remarried a year after his father's tragic car accident, and while Daniel had supported her decision, he had never felt comfortable with the idea of another man taking his father's place. "Richard," Daniel said, forcing a polite nod. He extended his hand, and Richard shook it firmly. "Glad to have you back," Richard said with a small smile. But Daniel noticed something off. The way Richard's eyes flickered toward Emily, just for a second. It was so quick that Daniel almost didn't catch it. Daniel pushed the thought aside. He was probably overthinking. "Come on," Julia said, touching Daniel's arm. "Let's go inside. Dinner's almost ready." Daniel carried his duffel bag inside, looking around the house. It felt smaller than he remembered, but familiar. His mother had decorated it with warm colors, family photos, and little touches that made it feel like home. At the dining table, they all sat down for dinner. Julia had made all of Daniel's favorite dishes: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. The comforting aroma filled the room as they started eating. "So how was it?" Julia asked, her eyes filled with concern. Being away for so long, Daniel chewed thoughtfully before answering. "It was tough, but I had my brothers out there. We had each other's backs." Richard nodded. "Must have been intense. I can't imagine what it's like out there." Daniel simply nodded. He didn't feel like sharing too much about his experiences. Some things weren't meant for dinner conversation. Emily, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke. "Did you see any tanks, Danny?" Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, I did. And helicopters, too." Emily's eyes widened. "Wow, did you ride one?" "A few times," Daniel said, smiling. "Maybe one day. I'll take you to see a real one up close." Emily's face lit up with excitement. "That would be amazing," Daniel laughed. But as he looked at Emily, he noticed something. She wasn't her usual self. She was smiling, yes, but there was something different. A hesitation in her voice, a shadow behind her eyes. She wasn't the same carefree little girl he had left behind 2 years ago. Daniel glanced at Richard, who was cutting his steak with slow, precise movements. The same unease crept into Daniel's chest again, but he shook it off. Maybe he was just being overprotective. Maybe he was just imagining things. Maybe. But as the evening went on, that feeling of unease only grew stronger. Daniel sat on the couch after dinner, sipping a glass of water while Emily rested her head on his shoulder. She had always been like this, clinging to him whenever he was around, like a little shadow that never wanted to leave his side. He smiled as he stroked her hair, but deep inside, something still felt strange. She had been happy to see him, but there was a nervousness in her behavior that he couldn't ignore. As the room fell silent, except for the ticking of the clock on the wall, Daniel's mind drifted back to the past, the home he once knew before everything changed. Daniel grew up in a small but warm home with his parents, Michael and Julia Carter, and his little sister, Emily. Their father, Michael, was a strong and kind man who worked as a firefighter. He always believed in doing the right thing and taught Daniel to be brave, honest, and protective of his family. "Son," his father would say, placing a firm hand on Daniel's shoulder, "one day you'll be a man. And a man must always stand up for his loved ones, no matter what." Daniel had admired him more than anyone in the world. His father was his hero. Michael would take Daniel on fishing trips and teach him how to change a tire, tie a knot, and even cook a simple meal. He wanted Daniel to be independent and strong. But more than anything, he taught him to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Emily, who was much younger, adored their father as well. She would sit on his lap, listening to his stories, giggling at his jokes. Their family was happy, filled with love and laughter. Then, everything changed. Daniel was 18 when he decided to join the army. His father had been proud of him, shaking his hand firmly before hugging him. "You'll do great, son," he had said. "I know you will." Daniel had left for basic training with a heart full of determination, ready to make his father proud. The training was tough, but he pushed through, knowing his family was back home, waiting for him. But just a few months later, tragedy struck. Daniel had been in training when he got the news. His father had been in a terrible car accident. A drunk driver had run a red light and crashed into Michael's car. He had died before reaching the hospital. Daniel remembered the call from his mother, her voice shaking, breaking between sobs. "Daniel, he's gone." The words had hit him like a bullet. His father, his strong, kind, and loving father, was gone forever. Daniel had been given leave to attend the funeral. He remembered standing in front of the coffin, unable to believe it was real. His mother, Julia, was devastated. She looked lost, holding on to Emily, who was just 7 years old at the time. The little girl didn't fully understand what was happening. She kept asking, "Where's Daddy? Why isn't he coming home?" Daniel had no answer. After the funeral, things became difficult. Julia had always been a loving mother, but losing Michael broke something inside her. She was suddenly alone, with 2 children to take care of. The weight of responsibilities crushed her. Bills piled up, and she struggled to make ends meet. Daniel wanted to help, but he was still in the army, and his training kept him away. He sent money when he could, but it wasn't enough. Then, one day, Julia told him over the phone that she had met someone, Richard. "He's a good man, Daniel," she had said softly. "He takes care of us. He's kind to Emily." Daniel had been surprised. It had been only a year since his father's passing, and the thought of someone else stepping into his father's place didn't sit right with him. But at the same time, he understood his mother's struggles. She needed help. So, when she told him she was getting married again, Daniel simply said, "If he makes you happy, Mom, then that's all that matters." But deep down, he wasn't sure if he truly believed it. When Daniel finally met Richard for the first time during a short visit home, he tried to keep an open mind. Richard was polite and seemed to care about Julia and Emily. He was a mechanic with a steady job and a calm demeanor. But something about him felt off. Daniel couldn't explain it, but there was a coldness in Richard's eyes, hidden behind his polite smile. He didn't speak much, and when he did, it was always carefully measured, like he was trying too hard to say the right things. Still, Daniel didn't question it. He was only home for a short time before returning to his military duties. His focus was on his training, on becoming a soldier his father would have been proud of. For the next 2 years, he stayed away, speaking to his mother and Emily only through phone calls and video chats. His mother always assured him that everything was fine, that Richard was taking care of them. Emily seemed happy enough whenever they talked, but she never said much about Richard. Now, sitting in the living room after dinner, with Emily curled up beside him, Daniel felt an uneasiness creeping into his chest. He glanced across the room where Richard sat, flipping through a newspaper. His face was calm, unreadable. Daniel didn't know why, but something inside him whispered that things were not as fine as they seemed. The house was quiet that night. The only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the wooden floor. Julia had gone to bed early, and Richard was in the living room, watching television. Daniel sat beside Emily in her small bedroom, tucking the blanket around her tiny frame. She looked peaceful, but something about her eyes didn't seem right. She had been unusually quiet all day, her small hands gripping onto his shirt whenever he was near. "Are you okay, kiddo?" Daniel asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Emily nodded quickly, but her eyes flickered with hesitation. She bit her lip and looked away. Daniel felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Something was wrong. He leaned in closer. "Emily, you know you can tell me anything, right?" His voice was soft, careful. "No matter what it is, I will always be here for you." Emily's fingers gripped the edge of the blanket. She hesitated, then looked up at him with wide, scared eyes. "Promise?" she whispered. "I promise," Daniel said firmly, taking her small hand in his. "Nothing will ever change that." There was silence for a moment. Then, Emily took a shaky breath and spoke. "Richard kisses me," she said, her voice barely audible. Daniel's body went stiff. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had just said. "What do you mean?" he asked gently, though his heart pounded in his chest. Emily swallowed hard. "He kisses me, on my lips." Daniel felt a surge of anger rise inside him, but he kept his face calm. He needed her to keep talking. "Does he do anything else?" he asked, his voice careful, controlled. Emily hesitated again. Her eyes welled with tears. "He touches me," she whispered. Daniel felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. His grip on her hand tightened slightly before he forced himself to relax. "Where does he touch you, Emily?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Emily's tiny fingers clenched the blanket as she pointed downward between her legs. Daniel's entire body tensed. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. A sharp, fiery rage burned through him, but he didn't let it show. Emily needed him to be strong right now. "What does he say when he does that?" Daniel asked, his voice shaking slightly despite his effort to stay calm. Emily sniffled and wiped her eyes. "He says, I can't tell anyone. He says if I do, Mom will leave me, and I'll be all alone." That was it. The final crack before Daniel felt something inside him shatter. He wanted to storm into the living room, grab Richard, and beat him until there was nothing left. His fists clenched at the thought, his entire body filled with an uncontrollable fury. But he couldn't do that. Not yet. Emily needed to feel safe. He took a deep breath and forced his anger down. He wrapped his arms around Emily, holding her tightly against his chest. "Listen to me, Emily," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You are not alone. You will never be alone. I am here, and I promise you, no one will ever hurt you again." Emily sobbed into his shirt, her little body shaking. Daniel stroked her hair, holding back his own tears. His little sister had been living in fear, suffering in silence. And he had no idea, but now he did. And he was going to make sure Richard never laid a hand on her again. Daniel could barely control his breathing as he stormed down the hallway. His heart pounded in his chest, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every muscle in his body burned with rage, but he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about Emily, his innocent little sister, who had suffered in silence for so long. He reached his mother's bedroom and pushed the door open without knocking. Julia was sitting on the edge of the bed, reading a book under the soft glow of a bedside lamp. She looked up, surprised at his sudden entrance. "Daniel, what's wrong?" she asked, noticing the fury in his eyes. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to control the storm of emotions raging inside him. But he couldn't hold back. "It's Richard," he said, his voice sharp and full of anger. "He's been hurting Emily." Julia frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. "Emily told me everything," he said, his voice shaking. "Richard has been touching her, kissing her. He told her to keep it a secret, saying you would leave her if she spoke up." For a moment, Julia just stared at him. The words didn't seem to make sense to her. She opened her mouth to say something, but no sound came out. Then, As the truth sank in, her face went pale. Her lips trembled. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be true." Daniel took a step closer, his voice firm. "Emily wouldn't lie about something like this. I saw the fear in her eyes, Mom. I held her while she cried. She has been living with this nightmare for God knows how long, and we never saw it." Julia's breathing became unsteady. Her hands clutched the edge of the bed as tears welled in her eyes. "Oh my God," she choked out. "Oh my God, my baby." She covered her face with her hands and let out a broken sob. The sound of her crying cut through Daniel like a knife. His mother had always been strong, always tried her best to hold the family together. But now, she looked shattered. "This is my fault," Julia sobbed. "I brought that man into our home. I trusted him. I thought he was good. I married him so I wouldn't have to raise Emily alone, but I let a monster live under our roof." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mom, this isn't your fault. Richard is the one who did this, not you." Julia wiped her tears, shaking her head. "I should have seen the signs. I should have protected her." Daniel sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't know," he said softly. "But now that we do, we need to make sure he never comes near Emily again." Julia sniffled and straightened her back. There was still pain in her eyes, but now there was something else, determination. "I'm divorcing him," she said firmly. "Tomorrow morning, I will call a lawyer. I don't care what it takes. I will never let him near Emily again." Daniel nodded slowly, but inside, his anger only grew. Divorce wasn't enough. That man had stolen Emily's innocence, had poisoned their home with fear. A legal document wouldn't erase what he had done. It wouldn't stop him from hurting someone else in the future. Julia wiped her face and turned to Daniel. "We'll go to the police," she said. "We'll make sure he pays for what he's done." Daniel remained silent, his mind already racing in a different direction. Julia sat on the bed, her hands trembling as she wiped the tears from her face. Her body felt weak, her mind clouded with guilt. She had spent years believing Richard was a good man, someone who would help her raise Emily, but she had been blind. She looked at Daniel, her eldest child, the one who had always been strong, the one who had taken after his father. But now, he wasn't just strong, he was shaking with anger. His fists were clenched so tightly that his veins bulged from his arms. His jaw was locked, his eyes burning with fury. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "We will go to the police. We will do this the right way. Richard must be removed from our lives legally." Daniel's head snapped toward her. His expression was cold, his eyes dark with rage. "The law won't protect Emily," he said, his voice low but firm. "I will." Before Julia could process his words, the bedroom door swung open. Richard stood in the doorway, his brows furrowed in confusion. He had been asleep, but had woken up to the sound of raised voices. He rubbed his eyes and looked around. "What the hell is going on?" Richard asked, his voice groggy. The moment Daniel saw him, the fury inside him exploded. All the memories of what Emily had confessed, every disgusting detail, every sickening whisper Richard had told her, flashed through his mind. His little sister had been suffering in silence, and the man responsible was standing right in front of him, acting as if nothing had happened. There was no more thinking, no more hesitation. Daniel reached into the back of his waistband and pulled out his personal handgun, a gun he had trained with, a gun he had carried through war. Before Richard could react, Daniel raised his arm, aimed, and pulled the trigger. Bang! The first bullet hit Richard in the chest, making him stumble backward. Bang! The second one sent him crashing into the wall, his eyes wide in shock. Bang! 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 The gunfire echoed through the house. Richard gasped, his hands clawing at his chest, trying to stop the bleeding. Daniel didn't stop. Bang! 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 8 bullets. Richard's body slumped to the ground, motionless. A pool of blood spread beneath him, staining the wooden floor. His lifeless eyes stared at the ceiling, his mouth slightly open, as if he wanted to say something but never got the chance. For a moment, the house was silent. Then, a piercing scream. Julia's hands shot up to her mouth as she let out a cry of horror. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed to the floor before everything went black. She had fainted. Daniel didn't move. His chest rose and fell rapidly as he stood there, the gun still in his hand, his finger frozen on the trigger. His ears were ringing from the gunshots, but his heart was pounding louder than any sound in the room. Then a small, trembling hand grabbed his arm. Emily. She stood beside him, her tiny fingers clinging to his sleeve. Her whole body was shaking, her face pale, her lips pressed together in fear. She didn't say a word. She just looked up at her big brother, her protector, with wide, terrified eyes. Daniel slowly turned to face her. The weight of what he had done began to settle in his chest. He had protected Emily, but he had also crossed a line, and there was no going back. The night was eerily quiet after the gunshots stopped. The house, once filled with warmth and family memories, was now a crime scene. The strong smell of gunpowder mixed with blood lingered in the air. Outside, the neighbors who had been sleeping peacefully were now awake, startled by the sudden noise. Some peered out from their windows, while others hesitantly stepped onto their porches. The sound of 8 gunshots had shattered the stillness of the night, and fear crept into their hearts. A woman from next door, Mrs. Thompson, grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. "There were gunshots," she whispered in panic. "It came from the Carter house. Please send help. I think something terrible has happened." Within minutes, the distant sound of sirens echoed through the neighborhood. Red and blue lights flashed against the houses as police cars sped down the street, followed closely by an ambulance. The police officers, led by Sergeant Walker, rushed to the Carter home. Finding the door locked, they wasted no time. With a swift kick, they broke it open and stormed inside, their guns drawn, ready for anything. What they saw made them freeze for a moment. Daniel was sitting in a wooden chair near the dining table. His hands rested on his knees, his face blank, his expression calm and unrepentant. His military training had prepared him for moments of chaos, and yet this was different. This wasn't war. This was home. The gun he had used lay on the floor beside him, the barrel still warm from the shots fired. The metallic scent of blood filled the air. Julia lay unconscious on the floor, her body limp. Emily was crouched in the corner of the room, her small frame trembling, tears streaming down her face. She hugged her knees tightly, too afraid to move. And Richard, his body lay lifeless near the doorway, his chest riddled with bullet holes, blood seeping into the wooden floor. His eyes stared at nothing. Sergeant Walker lowered his weapon and gestured for his team to secure the scene. 2 officers rushed to check on Julia, trying to wake her up. Another officer gently approached Emily, speaking in a soft voice to calm her down. 2 more officers stepped toward Daniel. "And where we can see them," one of them ordered. Daniel didn't resist. He didn't argue, plead, or try to run. Slowly, he raised his hands and let them pull him to his feet. One officer grabbed his wrist and twisted it behind his back, securing the cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. The metal clicked shut. Daniel didn't flinch. He had accepted this outcome the moment he pulled the trigger. As one of the officers began reading him his rights, another officer, Officer Miller, stepped forward. He was younger than the others, with soft eyes that held more curiosity than judgment. He looked at Daniel, at the way he stood so still, so controlled. "Why did you do it?" Officer Miller asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel turned his head slightly, locking eyes with the young officer. There was no regret in his expression, no doubt. His lips parted, and in a voice steady and unwavering, he simply said, "Because I had to." Officer Miller stared at him for a long moment before nodding. He didn't say anything else. The police led Daniel out of the house, his hands cuffed behind his back. The flashing red and blue lights painted his face in shifting colors as he stepped onto the porch. The neighbors watched in silence. Some whispered among themselves. Others simply stared. They had known Daniel as the brave soldier, the son of Michael Carter, a hero in his own right. Now they saw him as something else, a man who had taken justice into his own hands. The cold, gray walls of the police station seemed to close in around Daniel as he sat in the interrogation room. A single light above him flickered slightly, casting shadows across his tired face. His wrists were still cuffed, the cold metal digging into his skin, but he didn't seem to notice. His mind was elsewhere, on Emily, on his mother, on the man he had just killed. The door creaked open, and two detectives stepped inside. One was an older man with graying hair and a hard expression, Detective Roberts. The other was younger, with a more sympathetic face, Detective Lane. They sat across from Daniel, their eyes studying him carefully. "Sergeant Daniel Carter," Roberts began, placing a folder on the table. "You know why you're here?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." Lane leaned forward. "We need you to tell us everything, Daniel. From the beginning." Daniel didn't hesitate. His voice was steady as he spoke, his hands clenched into fists on the table. He told them about Emily, about what she had whispered to him that night, the way she clung to him, her small voice shaking as she revealed the terrible truth. He told them about the fear in her eyes, the way she thought their mother would leave her if she ever told. His jaw tightened as he continued. He told them about his mother, how she had trusted Richard, how she had no idea what was happening under her own roof. He described the look on her face when he told her the truth, the horror, the guilt, the devastation. And then he told them about Richard, how he had walked in, unaware of what was happening, how Daniel had looked at him, seeing not just a man, but a monster, how his rage had taken over, his hands acting before his mind could even process it. 8 bullets, one after another. He didn't regret it. When he finished speaking, silence filled the room. The detectives exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Finally, Roberts let out a long sigh. "You understand, Daniel, that what you did was against the law." Daniel met his eyes, unflinching. "I understand." Lane shifted uncomfortably. "But you don't regret it?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I protected my sister." Another silence. This time, it was heavier. After a moment, Roberts closed the folder and stood. "We're going to have to hold you until further notice. But first, we need to question your mother and sister." Daniel nodded. He knew this was coming. Julia's interview. Julia sat in another interrogation room, her hands trembling as she wiped away tears. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, her body weak from the shock. Detective Lane sat across from her, speaking in a gentle voice. "Mrs. Carter, we need you to tell us what happened." Julia sniffled, her fingers twisting together. I didn't know," she whispered, shaking her head. "I swear to you I didn't know. If I had, I would have never let that man into my home." Lane nodded. "We believe you, but we need details. What did you find out?" Julia's voice broke as she recounted the moment Daniel told her. She spoke about how her world shattered, how she realized she had trusted the wrong man, how she had failed as a mother. "I should have seen the signs," she sobbed. "I should have protected her." Lane sighed. "You can't blame yourself. The only person responsible for this is Richard." Julia covered her face with her hands. "And now my son is paying the price for what that monster did." Emily's interview. Emily sat on a chair too big for her small frame, her hands gripping the armrests tightly. A female officer sat beside her, trying to comfort her, but Emily couldn't stop shaking. Detective Roberts knelt in front of her, his voice soft. "Emily, sweetie, I know this is hard, but we need you to tell us what happened with Richard. We need to hear it from you." Emily's lips trembled. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't want to talk about it," she whispered. "I know," Roberts said gently, "but you're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore. Your brother made sure of that." Emily looked up at him, her lower lip quivering. Slowly, painfully, she began to speak. She told him about the nights Richard would come into her room, about the way he would touch her, whispering in her ear that she had to keep it a secret, about how scared she was, how she wanted to tell her mother but was too afraid. Her voice cracked as she said, "He told me that if I told, Mommy would hate me, that she would leave me." The female officer beside her gently rubbed her back. "That's not true, sweetheart. Your mother loves you so much." Emily sniffled, rubbing her eyes. "I didn't know what to do, but when Daniel came home, I felt safe again. I told him because I knew he wouldn't let anything bad happen to me." Roberts nodded solemnly. And he didn't. He stood up, rubbing a hand over his face. He had seen many terrible things in his career, but this was one of the hardest. The detectives gathered in their office, reviewing the case. They understood why Daniel did what he did. Any brother, any man with a heart would have done the same. But the law was the law. Detective Roberts let out a long breath. We have no choice. We have to charge him. Lane hesitated. But he's a hero. Roberts gave him a tired look. Heroes don't get to be above the law. The decision was made. Daniel Carter would stand trial. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, Daniel Carter's name was on every news channel, every social media platform, every radio talk show. Some called him a hero. Others called him a murderer. The headline was everywhere. Soldier kills stepfather to protect little sister. Hero or criminal? The internet exploded with debates. On one side, people praised Daniel. He did what any real man would do. One person tweeted, "The legal system fails victims all the time. He had no choice." Another wrote, "If someone hurt my little sister, I wouldn't wait for the law. Daniel Carter is a hero." A hashtag started trending. Hashtag Free Daniel Carter. People held vigils outside the Carter home, placing candles and flowers for Emily. They saw Daniel as a brave soldier, a big brother who did what the police should have done in the first place. But not everyone agreed. Legal experts and human rights activists spoke out. "Justice is not about personal revenge," said a well-known lawyer on a live news panel. "The moment we allow vigilante justice, we destroy the system that protects us all." A woman in another interview shook her head. "Murder is murder. Yes, what happened to the little girl is horrible, but we cannot allow people to take the law into their own hands." The debate turned heated. Was Daniel a hero or a criminal? Reporters stood outside the police station, microphones in hand. "Breaking news," a journalist announced. Sergeant Daniel Carter, an Army veteran, has been arrested for the murder of his stepfather, Richard Hayes. According to sources, Hayes had been abusing Daniel's younger sister, Emily, for months. The screens switched to an expert panel. "I understand people's emotions," one legal analyst said, "but we have courts for a reason. He should have reported it, not acted as judge, jury, and executioner." A retired police officer disagreed. "You think the system would have protected that little girl? How many times do we hear about cases where predators walk free because of technicalities? Daniel Carter did what the law should have done." The argument continued. Some news stations dug into Daniel's past, showing photos of him in uniform, talking about his military service. Others focus on the crime itself, playing 911 call recordings and flashing images of police tape around the Carter home. Every detail of the case was analyzed, questioned, debated. People took to the streets. In some cities, protesters held signs that read, "Justice for Emily. Daniel Carter saved a life. Hashtag Free Daniel Carter." They marched in front of the courthouse, demanding that Daniel be released. Meanwhile, another group protested on the opposite side. Their signs read, "Murder is not justice. No one is above the law." A woman shouted into a megaphone, "If we let people like Daniel Carter walk free, what's next? People taking revenge on their bosses? Their neighbors? We have laws for a reason." Tensions grew. People argued, shouted, even got into fights. Police had to step in to control the crowds. The whole country was watching. Emily became the face of a tragedy. A picture of her, hugging a stuffed bear, circulated online. People wrote messages of support. "Stay strong, little one. Your brother loves you. Daniel did this to protect you. We won't let him down." But Emily herself remained hidden from the public eye. She was too young to understand everything, but she knew one thing. Her brother was gone. She woke up crying at night, calling for him. She kept asking when he would come home. Julia did her best to comfort her, but she was broken too. She had lost everything: her husband, her son's freedom, and the trust in her own judgment. Reporters tried to get a statement from her, but she refused to speak to the media. She only gave one response when asked about Daniel's actions. With tears in her eyes, she simply said, "He did what he thought was right." As a trial date neared, legal experts debated what would happen next. His military background may work against him, one lawyer explained on a talk show. They could argue that his training made him more likely to use deadly force. Another lawyer disagreed, but he was acting out of emotion, not military training. Any big brother would have reacted the same way. Some believed he would get life in prison. Others thought he might be sentenced to a few years for manslaughter instead of murder. But one thing was certain, this case was not going away anytime soon. Day by day, the tension grew. Would Daniel Carter be punished for saving his sister? Or would the courts make an exception for a man who did what he believed was right? The world waited, and Daniel Carter sat in his jail cell, staring at the ceiling, knowing that no matter what happened next, he would never regret what he had done. The day of the trial finally arrived. The courthouse was packed. Reporters, legal experts, protesters, and concerned citizens all gathered to hear the fate of Daniel Carter. The atmosphere was heavy with tension. Emily sat in the front row, her small hands gripping Julia's tightly. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew one thing. Her brother was in trouble. Julia was pale, her eyes sunken from nights of crying. She hadn't slept since Daniel's arrest. Daniel sat in the defendant's chair, dressed in a suit instead of his usual military uniform. He looked calm, but his fingers were clenched together on the table in front of him. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was only worried about Emily. The judge entered, and the courtroom fell silent. The trial begins. The prosecutor spoke first. "This case is tragic," he said, his voice steady. "We all know what Richard Hayes did. No one is denying that he was a monster. But the law is the law. We cannot allow people to take justice into their own hands. If we do, we open the door to chaos." He turned to Daniel. "Sergeant Carter served his country. He is a soldier, a protector, but he is not above the law. If everyone acted on emotion, we would have no justice system at all." There were murmurs in the courtroom. Some nodded in agreement. Others shook their heads in frustration. Then, Daniel's lawyer stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, walking slowly across the courtroom. "My client is not a cold-blooded killer. He is a man who was pushed beyond his limits. He came home from war only to find another battle waiting for him, one where the enemy was inside his own home." He turned to the jury. "If it were your little sister, your daughter, your niece, what would you have done?" A few jurors lowered their eyes. "Daniel Carter didn't kill out of anger," the lawyer continued. "He killed out of love. He killed because the system failed him, because he couldn't risk letting a predator walk free." Silence filled the room. Then the judge sighed and leaned forward. "I have listened carefully to both sides," the judge said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were tired. "This case is not easy. There is no simple answer. Richard Hayes committed horrible crimes against an innocent child. No one here will argue otherwise." He looked at Daniel. "But taking the law into your own hands cannot be ignored." Julia held her breath. Emily clung to her mother, her small frame trembling. The entire courtroom leaned in, waiting. The judge continued. "Sergeant Carter, the court recognizes that your actions were driven by love and protection. The court also acknowledges your military service and the trauma you have endured." Daniel kept his eyes locked on the judge, his expression unreadable. "But," the judge said, pausing for effect, "murder, no matter the reason, cannot go unpunished." A deep hush fell over the room. In light of the circumstances, this court sentences Daniel Carter to 5 years in prison. Gasps filled the courtroom. 5 years. Many expected life. Others expected him to walk free. This was somewhere in between. The judge continued. "This is a lenient sentence, considering the gravity of the crime. The court hopes that during this time, you will reflect on your actions. You are not a villain, Daniel Carter, but you are not above the law." Daniel nodded, accepting his fate. He had expected worse. Then, the officers approached him, ready to escort him away. As Daniel stood, he turned his head toward Emily. She broke free from her mother's grasp and ran to him. "Daniel," she sobbed, throwing her arms around him. The officers hesitated but didn't pull her away. Daniel knelt down, holding her close. Through her tears, Emily whispered, "You saved me." Daniel's own eyes welled up, but he gave her a small, reassuring smile. "No one will ever hurt you again," he said softly. "I promise." Julia walked up, tears streaming down her face. "I will wait for you," she whispered. Daniel nodded, then slowly let go of Emily. As he was led away, he didn't look back. He knew he had done the right thing. And even if he had to spend 5 years behind bars, Emily was safe. That was all that mattered.